By the end of the 19th century, more than half the world's trade was financed in British pounds. Victorian investors grew rich trading in things on the other side of the world, things they never saw or perhaps never wanted to see. The merchant banking house of Anthony Gibbs and Sons made their fortune trading in a very unglamorous commodity, bird poo.
It was called guano, and it was collected from some islands off the coast of South America. Hence it was said, the House of Gibbs made their dibs by selling the turds of foreign birds.
Guano was gathered off the coast of Peru and sold as fertilizer. It made a fortune for British businessmen. The Gibbs family made so much money from guano they were able to bankroll much of the Peruvian economy. Victorian Britain, in effect, had two empires, one run by politicians, the other by moneymen like Gibbs. In South America, British banks supplied governments with credit. British companies built railways across Argentina. British settlers bought huge ranches and raised cattle. But the real killing to be made in Queen Victoria's empire was from something far more pernicious than bird droppings. And it made some Britons rich beyond their wildest dreams. The former British island colony of Hong Kong is so densely packed with banking and trading firms, it's known as the world's most vertical city. The place lives, eats, and breathes money.
The story of how Hong Kong came to be British reflects the empire's often ruthless pursuit of profit. It's an extraordinary story, even if it is one of the most shameful in British history.
And yet this dark episode began innocently enough. It was born from the English passion for a cup of tea.
Hello.
Hello. Hello.
How many types of tea do you have?
Mainly it's all the Chinese tea we have.
All
types,
of them?
Yes.
Oh, it smells lovely, doesn't it?
Yes. Would you like to have a cup of tea?
Oh, I'd love to have one, yes.
This way,
Please,
please.
thank you.
Yeah.
In the early 19th century, China was virtually the only place tea was grown. But there was a problem. For 3 centuries, China had severely restricted trade with the West. The British were desperate and even sent a delegation to China. They begged the emperor to open up his country and take some British products in exchange for tea. They presented him with all sorts of trinkets, games and curiosities, scientific instruments and toys. But he remained resolutely unimpressed.
We possess all things, said the emperor. I set no value upon things strange or ingenious, and I have no use for your country's manufactures.
But to get the tea they craved, the British had one thing to trade that many Chinese craved even more: opium. The drug was illegal in China, though the ban was widely ignored. There were an estimated 12 million peasants addicted to opium. The authorities there called it a deadly poison ruining the minds and morals of our people. The British grew opium poppies in India. There they processed it in factories on a colossal scale. Finally, it was shipped to China and sold to smugglers. With the profits, British traders bought Chinese tea. Two men in particular made a handsome profit out of opium. One was William Jardine, the son of a Scottish farmer. The other was his business partner and fellow Scot, James Matheson. From boats moored off the Chinese mainland, they sold industrial quantities of opium to be trafficked into China. At the time, selling opium wasn't illegal in Britain, nor did it cause them any moral qualms.
Jardine himself said that trading in opium was the safest and most gentlemanly speculation I'm aware of, and his partner Matheson thought it no more than morally equivalent to selling brandy or champagne in Britain. Business was just business.
In 1839, the Chinese emperor decided he'd had enough. He ordered more than 1,000 tons of British-supplied opium to be seized and destroyed. The British government was outraged. It invoked a sacred and very convenient principle, the principle of free trade. Britain had to be allowed to trade what and where she liked, especially in the case of opium.
Opium was making Britain rich. It soon accounted for over a fifth of the income of the government of India. Two mighty empires, each convinced of their own superiority, were now set on collision course.
The Opium Wars were about to begin. Britain's first ocean-going iron warship, the Nemesis, built in Liverpool, was sent out to take on the Emperor's navy. It helped destroy much of it in a single afternoon.
This was the modern world confronting an ancient one, sailing junks against steam-driven gunboats. The Chinese had no choice but to surrender and to open 5 ports to British trade. China had been forced to enter the modern global economy.
Hong Kong was one of Britain's prizes from the Opium Wars. Close to the Chinese mainland, it was perfect for trading with the newly opened Chinese Empire. Matheson moved his headquarters to Hong Kong in January 1841. Profits from the opium trade doubled.
So this most bustling of British colonies was built on a drug which stupefies people. Even more remarkably, the British continued to ship opium into China until well into the 20th century.
Hong Kong grew at an astonishing rate. A new bank was founded to service the China trade, the Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank. We know it as HSBC. Today, Hong Kong is a hothouse for global finance. But what about the company that played such a large part in founding Hong Kong's prosperity? Jardine Matheson & Co. Well, they're still here and still doing very well.
These are the modern headquarters of Jardine Matheson. The round windows have earned it the local nickname, the building of 1,000 orifices. At least, that's the polite version. Doubtless, somewhere in the foundations are buried the consciences of its founders.
In 1997, more than a century and a half after the Opium Wars, Hong Kong was returned to China.
The Union flag will now be lowered, and the national flag of the People's Republic of China will be raised.
All the important people in Hong Kong reached the first sight of their new flag.
When the British finally quit Hong Kong in 1997, they did so boasting they were handing on a territory intimately wired into the world economy. The shameful origins of British colonial presence here conveniently forgotten. But China has never entirely forgotten how a foreign power forced it at gunpoint to allow millions of its citizens to be turned into drug addicts.
The spoils of empire made Britannia rich. From the colonies came gold and silver and spices, even plants. And so vast was her empire, Britain could choose to grow them where she liked. Tea bushes could be planted for the first time in India and Ceylon. Tobacco planted in southern Africa. And there was a particular seed that made a very rich empire even richer. In the summer of 1877, a large packing case arrived here in Singapore's Botanic Gardens. Inside the case were 22 seedlings of rubber trees collected by British plant hunters in Brazil. These trees are descended from those original seedlings. Inside them is a milky fluid called latex. You make rubber from it. The director of the Botanic Gardens, Henry Ridley, was a man with a vision. He saw the truly massive potential of rubber and launched a crusade to convince every planter in the region to grow it.